Hello, Archie Dunlop here with Talking Astrology with Archie on Friday, December the 13th, 2024. Today I want to return to the theme of the killing of this health insurance CEO, Thompson. Now, of course, I will be looking at the astrology and the I Ching for today. That's, as always, the main theme of these videos. But this killing and people's reaction to it, is kind of bothering me. And I think that many people are actually underestimating its importance and that somehow something changed. And I think it may be connected with the fact that Pluto is just moved into Aquarius. And I think that maybe some people are in denial of what has happened. I've been looking at what the media has been saying about this killing, and of course there is a suspect. We don't know whether this suspect, Luigi Mangione, actually killed this CEO, but people are saying a lot about whoever the suspect is, their motivations, and also about what it means. And I suppose you can sort of distinguish between, say, what people on the left are saying and what they're saying on the right. So for example, on the left, many people on the left are saying that this is all about the sort of iniquities of the system, and that there is something really wrong with the insurance system in the US. But of course, those kind of articles, they always say, but murder is never justified. You can't, that doesn't change anything. You can't assassinate someone as a way of solving the problem. It doesn't work. And of course, there's the ethics of the issue. And then you look at people on the right, and the people on the right are, of course, very almost indignant about it. They kind of want to defend the status quo, and in terms of talking about whoever the perpetrator is, of course, we know that Luigi Mangione has been arrested for this crime and he's been charged with it. Again, doesn't mean that he did it, but they are suggesting that it's all about perhaps individual responsibility. Maybe he was overeducated. Whoever the perpetrator was overeducated, and there is another strand of thought that maybe the guy was insane. Maybe they had a personality disorder. And I find that kind of interesting. It's like, at some level, society wants him to have a personality disorder. Remembering that Pluto has just gone into Aquarius. Pluto moved into Aquarius the end of the 18th century. It was a time of revolution. It moved into Aquarius during the American Revolutionary War. Pluto was in Aquarius during the French Revolution. And last time Pluto was in Aquarius, there were feelings of tyrannicide, perhaps. The tyrant had to be overthrown in the United States or in the colonies. That would be the British king. In France, that would be Louis the 16th. But there was that kind of feeling, and now there's a certain sense of denial about what Pluto in Aquarius is all about. You have to say that whoever the perpetrator was, that they perhaps had a personality disorder, or perhaps they had some physical ailment which meant they had to do it. It's always kind of at the level of the individual. It seems to me that there is this terror that maybe the person who killed the CEO was maybe stone cold sober. They had a political motive for it, and they weren't insane. It was just a political act. And I do want to consider this fear, and I think it relates to Pluto moving into Aquarius. I also think that it relates to the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction on I think end of December 2020. That chart, the chart for the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction in 2020, tells us so much, and I don't think many astrologers, maybe astrologers have continued to take it seriously, but I think many people just think, well, Jupiter-Saturn conjunction, oh, that's gone. We've had that aspect. But no, that chart is very real, and it's in action. And I do think if we look at the killing of the CEO, we need to go back to 2020. Anyway, these are some of the things I want to discuss at the end of this video. I'm not saying that I'm going to be entirely coherent, but I feel there's just something to be said. Anyway, before looking at all of that, I want to consider the astrology and the I Ching for today, which is Friday, December the 13th, 2024. As always, if you enjoy this video, I'd be very grateful if you were to like it, and if you're not subscribed, I'd be really, really happy if you were to subscribe. But of course, only subscribe if you enjoy the video. So let's have a look at what is happening today, which is Friday. I mean, in terms of a thumbnail, got American flag. That's a picture of Pluto and terror. I think there is a link here. I do think that whatever happened on December the 4th, when this CEO was murdered, I think it may perhaps say something about the future. And I do feel that something changed, but anyway, I will be going into that a bit later. So let's look at what's happening today. So this is a chart set for noon in New York, and you can see that the moon is at 29 Taurus at noon in New York. So it's just about to go into Gemini. In fact, the moon goes into Gemini in New York at 22 minutes past midday. So if you're on the East Coast of America, then the last half of the day, moon is in Gemini. First half of the day, the moon is in Taurus. So you kind of get the best of both worlds, and I suppose you may find that the morning is very different from the afternoon and evening. So moon moving through Taurus. Taurus is an Earth sign. Now, the moon is the only planet in an Earth sign unless you count Uranus, and I kind of don't count Uranus in terms of elemental balance. So up until noon, or should I say from a European perspective, the moon goes into Gemini at 5:22 p.m, or that's in the UK, or 6:22 p.m. if you're in Paris or Berlin. So at 6:22 p.m, that's when the changeover is in Europe, and I suppose around that time in Africa, I suppose, late afternoon, probably more early evening. Now, if you're in Australia or New Zealand, the moon is not going to go into Gemini until tomorrow. But the moon is the only personal social planet in Taurus, and so it's perhaps a last opportunity to enjoy the earth. There is a certain earthiness, a certain connectedness to the material environment with the moon moving through Taurus. And then things change. Moon moves into Gemini. It's perhaps all a bit less, it's less definite. Perhaps there's more intellectualizing, more thinking, and less acting. Now, as the moon starts to move through the last final degrees of Taurus, it makes a conjunction to Uranus and a sextile to Neptune. So moon conjunct Uranus, which I think all of us are going to feel at some stage. I mean, I suppose on the west coast of America, that's going to be really quite early in the morning, but still the moon is going to be reasonably close to Uranus. So moon Uranus can be about a certain amount of stubbornness, things wanting to keep things in a particular way, not liking change, and perhaps getting quite upset if change is imposed upon us, and perhaps we do everything we can to resist change, and our view of the world is the best view of the world. That can be how moon conjunct Uranus works. And so it can be dramatic if we can't get our way. Moon conjunct Uranus, we can perhaps rebel, or we can just be very stubborn about it. And then moon sextiles Neptune. Again, moon in Taurus, sextile Neptune. That is a more gentle influence, but it is a sextile. It's I suppose, a fairly marginal influence, though. There's a certain amount of sensitivity there. And then the moon moves into Gemini. And as far as today is concerned, I don't think the moon is making any aspects of note in the first few degrees of Gemini. Now, there are a couple of aspects not involving the moon. One of those aspects is Mercury sextile Venus. So you can see that Mercury in Sagittarius is sextile Venus in Aquarius. And Mercury sextile Venus is a very nice aspect. It's a sextile, it's fortunate. Mercury and Venus as a pair are extremely creative, often connected with the arts, and making something which is really special, which has a certain sense of beauty, and is also about our talents. And so do think about what you can do creatively. It's not just that Mercury and Venus are a creative pair, but the sextile is a creative aspect. And I think the reason why a sextile is a creative aspect is because it's about sixness. It's a six of a circle, 60 degrees. 6 is 2 times 3. So two-ness is about struggle. The trine, of course the two-ness is about the opposition. The trine is about ease. So there's a bit of struggle, but not too much struggle. And so with effort, we can make something special. So whatever your artistic abilities are, or creative abilities, it can be entrepreneurialism as well, whatever it is, now is a chance to put it into action and get some recognition as well. I think that recognition will be around. Now, there is another aspect which is potentially quite important, and it is Jupiter-Sesquiquadrate Pluto. And so it's 2 slow-moving planets, and making this sesquiquadrate, there is a challenge here because it's a sesquiquadrate. Jupiter is, of course, about expansion, trying to go as far as we can, perhaps take things to the absolute limits, and we don't want to be constrained. But it's aspecting Pluto. So Pluto, we may be aware of the limits. We may be aware that in order to make the most of our abilities, that we are in some way going to have to create some kind of a transformation. And it's not necessarily done easily. And so this Jupiter-Pluto aspect, can often be connected with self-improvement. We want to make things better, and we're not satisfied with the way things are. And in a constructive sense, we could link that with the Mercury sextile Venus. So Mercury sextile Venus is about what we can do and how we can make the most of what we've been given. Our God-given abilities. And Jupiter sesquiquadrate Pluto is the struggle. It may not be 100% easy to express ourselves, but Jupiter sesquiquadrate Pluto is really suggesting that we can. And so that's the broad geocentric picture. A reminder, the moon is leaving Taurus. And so that means that there aren't going to be any planets in Earth signs except for Taurus for a bit. Of course, the Capricorn season is almost there. I mean, just over a week, the Sun will be moving into Capricorn, so it's not going to last forever. But just at the moment, there may be issues about the material world, about being realistic, and sometimes sort of floating off on a cloud. And so, that's perhaps something we need to think about. Now, in terms of the heliocentric picture, before looking at the heliocentric picture, I suppose I should just briefly look at the positions of the planets set for Sydney, Australia. Just a reminder that there is a difference. So at noon in New York today, Moon is at 20. Moon is at 29 Taurus, just about to move into Gemini. But if you set the chart for Sydney, Australia, you can see that the Moon is in Taurus. So at 20 degrees Taurus. So that is a reminder that if you are in Australia or in New Zealand, Moon isn't going to be in Taurus all day long. You don't have to worry about Moon going into Gemini. The Moon is an Earth sign, so there's a continued sense of grounding. And the Moon is making a conjunction to Uranus, and that is the main sort of lunar aspect. So perhaps if you're in Australia, New Zealand, things could be perhaps a little bit more crazy, in the sense that some people are being very stubborn and people are holding on to what they believe, and they don't like to be contradicted. And so perhaps we have to be a little more careful in Australia or New Zealand than, say, in the Americas. And Moon conjunct Uranus can be about sudden outbursts. It takes a long time to build up. Moon Uranus in Taurus, and then suddenly it explodes. That's the way Taurus can be. But I wouldn't want to exaggerate this. There is a Moon Uranus conjunction every month, so it's not a super important aspect. But I would have thought that Moon conjunct Uranus is more important in Australasia than it is in the Americas. Okay, so let me now turn to the heliocentric picture. So these are the heliocentric positions. So let's just look at this. So as always, this puts the Sun at the center of the solar system, where of course it should be. And the aspect that sort of jumps at us straight away is the fact that Mercury is opposition Pluto. Sort of Mercury in Leo, heliocentrically, is opposition Pluto in Aquarius. So Mercury opposition Pluto does indicate a certain struggle. It may be a mental struggle, an intellectual struggle, trying to get our ideas into the open, and perhaps using our mind as a way to create transformation, and also being very stubborn perhaps in terms of what we believe in. We have a set of beliefs, and we are holding on to these beliefs and these ideas, and we perhaps feel there are threats, that not everyone agrees with us, and maybe we have to struggle. And that's certainly one way of looking at Mercury opposition Pluto. Mercury opposition Pluto has a different meaning. It can have a different meaning. It can be quite intense. Pluto likes to dive down deeply. It wants to really understand the underlying truth of the matter. So we won't be satisfied with what we see on the surface. We want to really understand what makes things tick. And so it can, perhaps this Mercury opposition Pluto can be about investigative activities. So I suppose if one, is an investigative journalist, if such people exist anymore, one might be able to start to understand the truth of a matter. Or I suppose if you're, a detective, Mercury opposition Pluto would be very good at sort of trying to know what's going on and trying to understand what's going on. So with Mercury opposition Pluto, we shouldn't be satisfied with what we see on the surface. So that Mercury opposition Pluto, I would have said, is the main aspect heliocentrically. I mean, there are a few other things I suppose we could say, but the Earth is sextile Chiron, and with the Earth sextile Chiron, it might be a time when we want to be a little bit different. And I suppose that ties in with the fact that geocentrically there's Moon conjunct Uranus. And we don't want to do things in the same old way. We want to do things using a different approach. And it's not a time just to be different for the sake of it with Earth sextile Chiron. We want to be sure that we're doing something that is special to us. At least that's what we should be doing. And so yes, Chiron is a maverick, and so we're not prepared to follow the crowd, but we have to ask ourselves what makes us different, because we just can't be different just for the sake of it, even if the Earth is sextile Chiron. So having had a brief look at the heliocentric picture, I want to consider the astrology of the 12 signs and what is happening on Friday, December the 13th, 2024, from a perspective of these signs. So these are my forecasts for Friday. So starting with Aries. So Aries, the moon is changing sign. It's moving out of Taurus into Gemini. And I think that this is probably quite a good thing for you. I mean, I think that the moon in Taurus wasn't entirely to your liking. You felt that you were doing things which may have felt to themselves to be a little boring, and it took you a bit of time to really understand what was going on. And also with moon in Taurus, you may have had to deal with financial issues that in a way you didn't really want to be bothered with. I mean, why should you be bothered with them? They're so kind of out of keeping with who you are. And if it's not about money, it's just stuff that is material, and perhaps you realized how obsessed with money other people were, although I suppose there could have been a certain sense of projection there, and perhaps not fully recognizing how important money was to you, and instead sort of projecting it onto other people. And then today we have this conjunction between the moon and Uranus in Taurus, and I suppose that moon Uranus conjunction may remind you of how disruptive money can be. As soon as the conversation strays to money or who owns what, things just become difficult and people get angry and everything gets spoilt, and that's not something that we want. And this whole process of sort of worrying about money and material things, it may just feel that it's just slowing you down. And I think that Aries, you might feel today that you are being sort of unnaturally slowed down. It's just a dense world where it's difficult to move, though it will help when the moon moves into Gemini. So the moon moves into Gemini at noon, around noon if you're in New York, or it could be around 9 o'clock in the morning if you're on the West Coast, could be tomorrow morning if you're in Australia or New Zealand. But when the moon moves into Gemini, there is a certain sense of lightness, that finally things are starting to move. And also when the moon moves into Gemini, it makes a trine to Pluto, and that moon trine Pluto perhaps gives you a greater sense of your own power, and also your ability to change things. And if there's something you don't like, your words can make a difference, and certainly your arguments can make a difference. And when we looked at the heliocentric picture, Mercury was opposition Pluto, and so with Mercury opposition Pluto, that is about persuading people, and perhaps that Mercury opposition Pluto is something you can use. You don't have to use it, particularly as it's a heliocentric opposition, but if you can somehow tune into the power of that Mercury opposition Pluto, you might be able to create something of a change. Now, when you're dealing with people, don't forget Venus's opposition Mars. Okay, that opposition is past exactitude. Venus is moving on from that opposition, but it's still there to some extent. And so with that Venus opposition Mars, there might be a certain feeling that you and other people are not entirely on the same wavelength. I mean, that is possible. And it's not as bad as it was yesterday, but you need to still consider the possibility that your actions could be upsetting, or there might be something about you that other people don't like, or they just find difficult to deal with. And so I would have said it's still a time when you should try to be on best behavior, though I mean, I do understand there are things you want to do, and you can't always be on best behavior. And going back to that Mercury opposition Pluto heliocentrically, it just may be that this is a time when you really feel that you need to be persuasive, that you've got a viewpoint that you want other people to know about, and if you can change their mind about something, well, that would be great. Though, don't underestimate other people, and don't naturally assume that you have all the answers and that your ways are the best ways. And I actually mean that in quite a constructive sense, because there is a sextile aspect between Mercury and Venus, and Mercury sextile Venus it's a very talented aspect where other people's abilities are close to the surface, and it may be that some of the people around you are very clever and they've actually got something to offer. So if you're feeling frustrated about something and you feel that things aren't moving, just consider the possibility that someone else can help you, that someone has got an ability that maybe you don't have, or that perhaps they have they have some knowledge that you don't have. So don't be afraid to ask for help, and if possible, you should see other people as something of a resource. Taurus, the moon is right at the end of your sign, and it's making a conjunction to Uranus. And this conjunction with Uranus is perhaps a reminder that you are different, that you see things in a way that is different from how other people see it. And moon conjunct Uranus can be something of a revolutionary. You have a unique view, and you also have a unique set of feelings, a feeling that something matters and it's important you get your way, because your way is the right way. Moon conjunct Uranus can be very stubborn, especially if it's in Taurus. So Taurus, you have to ask yourself, how different do you want to be? Because if you try to be too different, of course, that might attract criticism, might attract, you might get some flack, especially as Venus is opposition Mars. Now, that Venus opposition Mars was exact yesterday. It's breaking up, but still, Venus opposition Mars may represent another person getting annoyed with you, or being critical, or disagreeing with you. And so the question is, Taurus, how far do you want to take it? Taurus, as I've say on numerous occasions, can be a stubborn sign, and for many Taurians, principles can be very important. But principles on their own don't really amount to much. One can get so obsessed with principles that one ends up destroying oneself, and one doesn't want to go that far. And ideally, Taurus, you need to have, it would be good if you could have, a certain lightness of touch. And that lightness of touch may come from the fact that Mercury is sextile Venus. So Mercury is in Sagittarius, it's sextile Venus in Aquarius, and it's a good aspect, and it's an aspect that benefits you. And I would not have said that Mercury sextile Venus was a remotely stubborn aspect. It's actually quite relaxed, and it's actually confident. It's confident in its own abilities. And Taurus, you should be confident in your own abilities, because if you are confident, that takes away so much of the stress. You're no longer desperate to prove a point. And perhaps you don't have to be a revolutionary anymore, because your talents can't be compromised. They won't be compromised. Everyone accepts them. Everyone loves them. If people can see what you can do, they will be very happy. They'll be appreciative. And you may be in a position, Taurus, where you can help other people. Share what you know, share what you've learnt, and try to be as enthusiastic as possible. You try to embrace everything, and try to see things in a way that is as positive as possible. So that is something that I think you can do, and I think people need a bit of positivity. And so again, that is about using that Mercury sextile Venus, and perhaps being available, and also telling people what you can do, but in such a way that you're not showing off. Sometimes people talk about their achievements and because they don't feel very confident, and it just sounds a bit fake. But the reason you are talking about what you can do is simply because you want to share it, and that should be your motivation, to share. And if you can do that, so much the better. Now, the moon, I said, is leaving Taurus. It is moving into Gemini, and this movement will happen sort of around 9 o'clock in the morning in California, approximately. It will happen tomorrow if you're in New Zealand or Australia. But we know, with the moon moving into Gemini, for some Taurians, that might create an emphasis on money and material things, especially because when the moon moves out of Taurus, there will be no planets in Earth signs except for Uranus. And so Taurus, when no planets are in Earth signs, you can get a little bit nervous. You might be thinking, can you touch the world? There's something that a little bit sort of intangible about everything, and as a result, there can be compensation. So, that might mean that you become overly concerned with material things and with money as the moon moves out of Taurus into Gemini. And I would have said, don't worry about it too much. Don't get too obsessed. And if you feel that something is missing in a material sense, you can get hold of it, but I don't think you have to make a big fuss about it. I don't think you have to involve yourself in any form of confrontation. Because the moon moves, when it moves into Gemini, it makes a trine to Pluto, and that moon trine Pluto perhaps will allow you to engineer a situation where you can get what you want, but perhaps without getting involved in any kind of conflict, because I don't think conflict is anything you want today. Gemini. Gemini, the moon is in a state of transition. It's transitioning from Taurus into Gemini, and the moon moving into Gemini tends to be something really quite useful for you. It allows you to express yourself and perhaps to talk about what's important in your life. And it also, moon in Taurus, moon in Gemini, gives you a certain amount of variety. And of course, in the Gemini life, variety tends to be very important. But as the moon prepares to go into Gemini, as it moves through sort of late Taurus, you may still feel that something has to be held back, and it may be that timing becomes important. Now, Geminis can be impatient. They can be verbally impatient as well. They may be desperate to say something. They just want to say something. They get it into their heads. They really want to say something, and they can say what they want to say at a time that is absolutely inappropriate. And through an inappropriate comment, they can get themselves into trouble. There's nothing wrong with the comment, by the way. Nothing wrong with it at all. It's just that the timing was wrong. Every idea has its moment. Has its moment when it is fully developed and is ready to be put out there. But if you say something too early, it will just seem weird and out of place. So Gemini, do get your timing right. And for the first part of the day, in fact, maybe all day, if you're in Australia or New Zealand, it may be a time when you perhaps need to hold back, bite your tongue maybe, but just wait for the moment to arrive. But when the moon does move into Gemini, it will make a trine to Pluto, and that moon trine Pluto is going to give you the opportunity to say what's on your mind and to be able to do it with power, but also I think with a certain amount of grace, being able to tell people what's bothering you and also tell people what's interesting to you. And in the process, I think that you can create real change. And at the same time, you're expressing a different side to your personality, which perhaps some people hadn't seen. Perhaps you had been underestimated. And when you explain who you are and what you can do, many people are going to be very pleasantly surprised, and they're going to want to know you. They're going to want to be in touch with you, and they're going to want to hear more. Again, so this is why timing is so important. Message comes too early, it doesn't work. But get the timing right, and it becomes something of central importance. And we shouldn't forget that Mercury is making a sextile to Venus, and Mercury is your ruler, and it's sextile Venus, and that is about you as someone who is certainly making the right impression, someone who is able to give a very good account for yourself. And I think that's something you can do over the next day or two, and your abilities and your talents will be absolutely obvious. So Gemini, think about what you're good at. It needn't be about art. I mean, it could be something to do with business, or it could be entrepreneurial. Whatever you're good at, whatever you feel people should know, now is the time to talk about it. I think that you will get favourable attention, and people will realize what you've got to offer. But yeah, timing does matter. And what you mustn't do, Gemini, is deliberately try to shock people out of the blue. Certain temptation for Geminis to do that, because Geminis can get bored, and when things are boring, you want to just do something to just change everything. And yeah, sure, you can always create shocks. That shock might be about the moon conjunct Uranus in very late Taurus, and that would be about you getting attention at the wrong moment. So I think overall, Gemini, I think the most important thing is to get your timing right. Cancer, there is a conjunction between the moon and Uranus today, and I think it's likely that moon-Uranus conjunction is going to have some impact on you. That could be sort of earlier in the day if you're in the Americas, that this moon conjunct Uranus. But with that moon conjunct Uranus, you perhaps have the ability to change things. And if you want to create change, I would suggest that it's not something that you can do gradually, because I suppose if you try to create gradual change, people slowly get used to it, and they can then become, I suppose, somewhat complacent, and they may feel they can handle the kind of change that you are presenting, and then it's very difficult to have a real impact. So it's perhaps best that you don't give much warning. In fact, it's a good day for springing things on people. And of course, it's got to be something that is appropriate. You're not just trying to spring things on people for the sake of it. But what you're doing is you're realizing that something is important, and then you're creating a dramatic effect. And other people have no choice; they have to respond to it, and so that's something you can work on. Once you've made your dramatic effect, then in a way you don't have to hang around. You don't have to wait to sort of enjoy the aftershocks. It may be that you have to make your point and then leave. Let people think about it, because I think Cancer, some people are not very aware, or they haven't been very aware, and you kind of have to make them aware, and sometimes you have to shock people into being aware, and once people see reality, there's nothing to be said. You can indeed leave them to work it out, and then you could say, well, you've done your job. And in moon in Taurus, it will move into Gemini over the course of the day, and so moon moving into Gemini for a Cancerian, it can be a time where you feel that you need some time to maybe recharge your batteries with moon in Gemini, and you perhaps need to think things through. And I think with moon in Gemini, it may be a time over the next couple of days with the moon in Gemini that you may feel that there is a certain decision to be made, a certain choice, and it's a choice that only you can make, remembering that when the moon moves into Gemini, it does make a trine to Pluto. So that moon trine Pluto is quite intense and is encouraging you to really go deep, to think about what you want to do next, and to certainly not be satisfied with surface appearances, and perhaps be prepared to sort of ask yourself important questions. And if you don't have immediate answers to your questions with the moon in Gemini, then you can perhaps do some research, work things out, maybe do some reading. Okay, you could ask people questions, but asking people questions, it kind of needs to be done in a relatively formalized way. What you don't want to have is just casual conversation. I don't think that's going to be something you want. You want answers, and once you've got your answers, you don't want to continue with a conversation just for the sake of it. But maybe you don't have to talk to anyone in order to find things out. Your own researches, I think, can actually be quite successful. So in a way, Cancer, it's a day of two parts. There's something you have to do, that you have to make an impression, but once you've made your impression, then you don't have to hang around. I suppose it was like what someone told me about debating. The advice, if you're in, when I was at school, someone said about debating, you're supposed to stand up, speak up, and shut up. So you make your point, and then you just disappear and let people think about it. Leo, the moon is in the process of changing sign. It's moving from Taurus to Gemini, and from a Leo perspective, Taurus and Gemini are both fairly sociable signs. Taurus is perhaps more about society and can be related to business and career, how you're seen in society. Gemini is sort of a bit lighter. It's perhaps more about your friends and socializing. So the moon is moving between these two signs. So regardless of what time of day we're at, regardless of the time zone, I think it's a time when you need to be seen and heard. And generally, I would have said that things get less serious as the day progresses, I would have thought. And in terms of seriousness, well, there is a conjunction between the moon and Uranus in Taurus, and that conjunction can be about you having an impact and feeling perhaps in a public sense that you need to do something that gets other people's attention. And you either do it deliberately or unconsciously. I mean, it's probably best to do it deliberately. You decide that you want to get some attention, moon conjunct Uranus in Taurus, because you've got something to say and you want people to listen to you. If you ignore the moon conjunct Uranus, then it might sort of creep up behind you and knock you on the head. I mean, not literally. So, perhaps you could then say that moon conjunct Uranus wants to be honoured. We must always think about that with astrology, that certain things want to be honoured. And if you don't honour an aspect, then the aspect will have a way of, creeping up behind you. So perhaps you need to confront that moon conjunct Uranus directly and bring it into being, and making sure that it is honoured. You do something that is somewhat dramatic. It doesn't have to be overly dramatic, but it is about getting attention and perhaps taking a stand. And by doing that, I think in most cases you'll be in keeping with the times in which you live. I mean, on a very short term, the times in which you live, I suppose what I'm really saying is December the 13th, 2024. And having made your point, perhaps in quite a serious way, then you can allow things to develop. And as the moon moves out of Taurus into Gemini, now that might be this morning when the moon moves into Gemini if you're in California, it might be tomorrow if you're in Australia or New Zealand, but as the moon moves into Gemini, things do lighten up, and I think that you can enjoy other people's company, and I think that you'll realize that there's something about you that is fundamentally interesting. in fact, quite attractive, and people will notice you, and you're going to be the kind of person that people will like to have around, and they'll want to know you more. Though don't necessarily take things too far, because we do have an opposition aspect between Venus and Mars. Now that Venus-Mars opposition is separating, and it was exact yesterday, but it's still operational. And so with Mars in Leo, in your sign, opposition Venus in Aquarius, there's just some possibility that in terms of dealing with other people, especially on a one-to-one level, you take things too far, and you try too hard, and you make too much of an effort to impress your personality on someone else, and they might not appreciate it. Venus in Aquarius might represent a principle that can't quite handle you. So what you don't want to do, Leo, is give people the full blast of who you are, particularly in a close one-to-one setting, because sometimes, Leo, you can be too much of a good thing. Virgo, I think things look good. We have a sextile aspect between Mercury and Venus, so that sextile should help you in a number of ways. I think that with Mercury sextile Venus, you're going to be, quite clever, and I think you're going to be able to use your abilities. So whatever you've got, I think that you should have no difficulty harnessing it, in such a way that you get appreciated, and also that you make things happen. And I think in many cases, you don't have to make things happen by using huge amounts of effort or having to really struggle. It could actually be quite easy. And so perhaps, Virgo, the right approach is to be quite relaxed about everything. If you're good at something, it's obvious. You know what you're good at. And that Mercury sextile Venus is just going to really help you bring it out into the open. And perhaps, it can be done in a way, that doesn't cause a fuss. And in fact, it doesn't necessarily have to be appreciated. I say get something out into the open, which I suppose when you say get something out into the open, that assumes that other people appreciate it, but it doesn't necessarily have to be appreciated. Mercury is in Sagittarius, and it being in Sagittarius, that's, of course, Mercury is your ruler. Mercury in Sagittarius is a fairly low profile position for Mercury. Especially as it's retrograde, and so there may be things actually you kind of don't want to talk about, don't want to discuss, don't want to advertise, but they're still very important to you. And perhaps with Mercury sextile Venus is a time for really making things happen in your own way, but but not really needing any attention. So you're just working away. Other people are doing their own thing. Maybe, I don't know, getting ready for Christmas or whatever. But you're very active. And I think that you're happily active. And that Mercury sextile Venus actually has a certain amount of discipline to it. And you know how you want things, you know how you want things to look, and the aesthetic aspect of things should not be forgotten. So if you are creating anything that is physical, three-dimensional, then it will be well balanced, and it will be very carefully prepared. And if it's perhaps not so physical, maybe you're writing something, your choice of words will be really good. And I think that it's actually a good time to be crafting your words. So I don't know, if you're writing a book or a paper or an essay, or I suppose it might just be an email, you will be able to get the balance right. And so that does look good for you, Virgo. And at the same time, the moon is changing sign. It's moving out of Taurus into Gemini. And so moon in Taurus has been quite nice for you, I think. I think moon in Taurus has allowed you to think about things beyond your immediate environment and think about the connectedness of everything, and also to get a sense of, what's important and what's just completely trivial, not worthy of your interest. And so being able to get that balance right, I think really does matter. And so with the moon moving out of Taurus into Gemini, there is a change there. And I think that with moon moving into Gemini, moon then makes a trine to Pluto as soon as it moves into Gemini. I think that is a time, Virgo, when you do find your focus. Pluto is a very focused planet. And so moon in Gemini is about you perhaps deciding what is important. You've decided already what's unimportant, but you know what's important, and then you're able to give it everything you've got. And in the process, I think that things should work very well for you. And maybe this is a time when you can come out into the open. I think there is certainly a time for a certain amount of secrecy, or certainly privacy, you respecting your privacy, not feeling that you have to advertise what you're doing. But at a certain stage you may have to come out into the open, and that might be that moon moving into Gemini and you not being afraid of what you're doing, because you are going to, I think, be very confident. And Virgos always need to be confident, and self-doubt is not your friend. And perhaps you've been through the time of self-doubt. And of course, Mercury is still retrograde. That is true. And so it's difficult to be 100% certain of everything while Mercury is retrograde. But you shouldn't forget that Mercury is coming to a standstill. It's slowing down. In other words, Mercury is preparing to go direct. And I think Mercury goes direct, I think it's on Sunday. And so then things really start moving again. So perhaps this is actually what you're doing. You're preparing for a change. You're preparing for a very fortunate change with Mercury. With Mercury going stationary direct, it can then sort of moving forward through Sagittarius, and of course next month it moves into Capricorn. And I think Mercury moving into Capricorn is going to be great, and it should be. Capricorn's an earth sign. Mercury in Sagittarius, it doesn't always work quite so well because it's in its detriment. So I think in terms of what is going on today, you may just see evidence that things really are improving. Libra, you know that a lot of things are not simple, that they can't necessarily be taken for granted, and that they need a certain amount of exploration and research. And I'm not just talking about research on a sort of a mental level. It's also about trying to understand what's happening emotionally, and that is a bit of a task for you. And on the way there might be a few surprises. Perhaps you're going to be surprised about your own feelings, or it might be about another person's feelings. Maybe just realizing that you had stronger feelings than you realized about a particular subject. So that is certainly a possibility. And I suppose if we want an aspect to represent that, it would be that moon conjunct Uranus. So moon conjunct Uranus in Taurus can be an emotional surprise. It's not a surprise that you are revealing, but it's just something that you privately feel. Now, I know that sounds a bit complicated and perhaps not fun, but I think it's kind of liberating. It's liberating to realize the truth about something, and also it makes you feel more complete. And in another sense, things are complete or feeling more complete because Mercury is sextile Venus, and Mercury sextile Venus is an aspect that is very talented. So you are represented by Venus in Aquarius, and Venus has been in Aquarius for a bit of time. It's going to remain in Aquarius, I think, for the rest of the month. And so with Mercury sextile Venus, that allows you to really get in touch with who you are and what you can do. And I think that as the moon moves out of Taurus and into Gemini, you really are going to feel that. You're going to feel that you are in tune with everything, and whatever you're doing, it's going to be appreciated. And that means that you can start to discuss things. Maybe in the past couple of days you felt there were things you couldn't discuss, perhaps because you felt the audience wasn't sufficiently sympathetic. But now with the moon moving into Gemini, you can certainly be a lot more open. And if you say things as they are, and you are sort of absolutely honest about things, people will respond very well, and they may actually realize that you really have got something to offer, and you may indeed feel a sort of a new sense of appreciation. And as soon as you start to feel appreciated, you're then encouraged to be even more enthusiastic. And if you can show some enthusiasm and passion about things, I think that it will be very much appreciated. I mean, you don't want to sit on the fence today. I mean, I know that Librans do like to sit on the fence sometimes because, they don't want to put themselves in a position where, I don't know, they might be vulnerable to, criticism or attack. But if you don't make yourself clear, you're going to get ignored, and you might be worse. I suppose you could come over as a sort of fairly wishy-washy person who's not committed to anything. And so be clear to people about what's important to you. And don't be too hesitant. If you think something is true, if you think something is right, Libra, then be honest about it. Because right now, that's what people want. And if you can give people honesty and also give them a big dose of who you are and what you can do, I think they're really going to like it. And so you can come over as being an important person who really can't be discounted, and perhaps other people will realize that if they want things to happen, then you have to be part of their plans. Scorpio, you are still under the influence of this Venus-Mars opposition. So this Venus-Mars opposition was exact yesterday. So it's losing some of its power, but still you do have to be aware of how you might occur to people still. And if you're too strident, too obsessed with yourself, then I think it's going to be quite likely that you'll get a negative reaction. And you shouldn't forget that there is a conjunction between the moon and Uranus in Taurus. And this moon-Uranus conjunction can be a little bit unpredictable, and it might encourage you to do things that you weren't actually planning on doing. And if you don't give much warning and you just do it because it feels like being the right thing to do, then yeah, the response might not be good. And I think as far as you're concerned, people don't want surprises, but somehow there might be something about you that is surprising, and you could shake things up. And if you do shake things up, or do something some people weren't expecting, the aftershocks may not run in your favour. So perhaps, Scorpio, with that moon conjunct Uranus, you should make a special effort to be cool and calm and try to avoid drama. Though there is an alternative way that Moon-Uranus conjunction could work, and the Moon-Uranus conjunction may represent a surprise that other people spring on you. Or there might be a surprise realization about another person that you really weren't expecting. Now, if there is a surprise of that kind, don't overreact to it. It's very easy to do that. You see something you've never seen before, you've seen perhaps a behavior you've never seen before, you want to respond immediately, but maybe it's just a time to allow it to sink in. And so the moon, having made that conjunction to Uranus, will, as it moves through late Taurus, it will then move into Gemini. And so with the moon moving into Gemini, Scorpio, that might be a time when you need to just think things through and not say anything unless you really have to, because it is a bad time, Scorpio, to jump to conclusions, and that's especially the case when it comes to other people. I'm sure you have strong opinions about other people, good opinions, bad opinions, whatever, but those opinions are not set in stone, and it just may be that over the next couple of days you will have cause to change those opinions. And at the same time, Scorpio, you mustn't allow any underlying negativity to spoil things. And I think at the moment there is a bit of negativity, and it might be, Scorpio, that you feel that the world is a little bit heavy, and that there isn't much scope for advance. Not just personal advance, but the world itself, the world around you, seems to be a little bit stuck and uncompromising. And it's all about restriction rather than freedom. So that is something potentially that could be going on at the moment. And again, it's a situation where you mustn't overreact, and you mustn't assume that things are going to stay this way forever. And in terms of change and trying to be optimistic, where would you find that? Well, in fact, you might find that through other people if you were to give them a chance, because one of the main aspects today is Mercury sextile Venus, and Mercury sextile Venus could say a lot about some of the people around you, and perhaps you've underestimated them. And if there's something bothering you, you might take the view, well, there's no point in talking about it, there's no point in getting advice, but you're not going to know if you don't try. And it just may be that someone who you thought was absolutely useless could actually be incredibly helpful. But you do have to give them a chance. And in fact, you also perhaps have to reveal something about yourself. Scorpio can be a very secretive sign, and if something is wrong, Scorpios can keep it to themselves. But if you keep everything to yourself, how can things change? Okay, sometimes it can happen. There can be sort of personal transformation, but sometimes talking about something that's bothering you with someone you trust can elicit an interesting response, and you may find that the solution to something lies with another person. Sagittarius, we have a sesquiquadrate between Jupiter and Pluto, and this is one of the main aspects today. And so Jupiter is your ruling planet, and it's sesquiquadrate Pluto. And this aspect is about you not being entirely satisfied. Now, this aspect, although it is exact today, it's quite slow moving, so it is really about perhaps this week, and it will be around for certainly longer than a day. And so what do you do, Sagittarius, if you are not satisfied? And you may not just be unsatisfied with yourself, but you might be unsatisfied with other people and their behavior and how they're responding to you. And you might also think, remembering that Jupiter is not in a great position in some respects, because it is going retrograde and it is in Gemini, the sign of its detriment. Because of Jupiter's position, you might just feel a certain sense of powerlessness. And so with Jupiter sesquiquadrate Pluto, you might want to change things. And there are different ways of changing things. You can change things in a way that is single-minded, but perhaps somewhat clumsy. You've got to change everything. And you're not very sympathetic about it. It's just almost change for the sake of change. And perhaps being concerned with your own power for the sake of power. And it's important that you don't get too obsessed with power dynamics with this Jupiter sesquiquadrate Pluto, because I think the message from Jupiter sesquiquadrate Pluto is that change starts from within. So before worrying about what other people are doing or what they're not doing or what society is doing, the world in which you're living, before worrying about that, I think that you need to worry about yourself. Are you doing everything you can? Make sure you are. Have you left any stone unturned? Are you working on yourself as much as is possible? Because that's what Jupiter sesquiquadrate Pluto wants you to do. And once you do that, once you take responsibility for everything, which I think Jupiter sesquiquadrate Pluto is really asking you to do, then yes, I think that things can really happen. And I think that other people are going to notice. And this Jupiter sesquiquadrate Pluto, it can make you a difficult person to have around if you are kind of projecting it, expecting other people to change, blaming other people. But on the other hand, if you own it, have full ownership of Jupiter sesquiquadrate Pluto, then I think it's a time when you can really start to make things happen. And I mustn't underestimate your power and your ability to create drastic change, radical change. And that can be a good thing or a bad thing. And I suppose that's up to you in a way to make the decision or make the judgment. Now, on a sort of more down to earth level, we have the moon changing sign, and the moon starts today in Taurus, and then it moves to Gemini. And moon in Taurus, from a Sagittarian perspective, in some respects isn't great. Taurus and Sagittarius don't have an easy connection with each other. Moon in Taurus is a little bit slow, and perhaps you felt things have been slow. I mean, I think you could have done some useful work, useful preparation, and you could have changed some of your routines. That is possible. But, when the moon moves into Sagittarius, which is, of course, the same sign as Jupiter, because we've already got, sorry, not Sagittarius, when the moon moves into Gemini, when the moon moves out of Taurus into Gemini, moves into the same sign as Jupiter, that is a time when you do have to consider the outside world. And yes, there is still a danger of projection, which I was talking about with this Jupiter sesquiquadrate Pluto, thinking it's other people who are slowing you down, other people who are acting as a drag on you. And of course that is not true. At least in the first instance, it's about you reforming yourself. And I think with Moon in Gemini, you should be trying to get a perspective on things, looking at the role other people play on your life, and also getting the balance right, knowing what you can do, doing as much as you can, and then you can pass the baton. You've done the work, then you perhaps allow other people to take over. Okay, I won't say take over, but to perhaps join in. And so perhaps that's what Moon in Gemini is about. It is about getting the balance right and being able to communicate your needs, but in a way that doesn't seem aggressive or demanding. You make it clear that you understand everything, you've done the work, and then other people will appreciate that. And that would be a good way of utilizing the fact that the moon, when it moves into Gemini, it makes a trine to Pluto. And so Moon trine Pluto can be about you being persuasive, but I think also reasonable. Capricorn, you can feel the impact of a sort of lunar sign change. So the moon starts the day in Taurus, and at the end of the day, or perhaps into tomorrow if you're in Australia or New Zealand, it ends in Gemini. But with the moon in Taurus, moon making a conjunction to Uranus, I think that this is a time when you're able to really tune into what makes you special. I think that is very important, and it's about what makes you special. It's not what makes anyone else special. And I think that moon conjunct Uranus allows you to consider what it means to be creative in your own way, and also to do something surprising. I mean, in fact, Capricorn, you might be surprised by yourself. You may do something that you think you can't really do, but then you realize, yes, you can do it. Perhaps you had learned to do it. You'd learned how to do it, and you hadn't realized there was a learning process at work, and somehow it all comes together. And so that might be how the Moon-Uranus conjunction works. It could also be that you surprise other people. People don't expect you to do something. They don't expect you to be able to do something, and then you do it, and people are amazed. And of course, you were always able to do it at some level. And I think, whatever you're doing, wherever you're going, I think there is something about you that is just impressive. And you are impressive because you just seem to have a natural facility. And again, you don't have to shout about it, but it's like there is an effortlessness to today. And the less effort it is, the more impressive it will be. And for example, if you if you're working today, or if you're engaged in business or a career, I think that you're going to benefit from a sextile between Mercury and Venus. Mercury and Venus, it actually can be quite an entrepreneurial sextile, but you will just understand the way things work, and you will also show that you understand hidden dynamics, and hidden dynamics are important, and some people aren't aware of them, but you are completely aware of these dynamics with this Mercury sextile Venus, and you might be able to explain to someone or to other people the way things work. They have perhaps been struggling to make something happen, and it just hasn't happened. And to you, it's absolutely obvious why it wasn't happening. And now you can let people in on the secret. And I think that will be very much appreciated. The Mercury sextile Venus could also be useful from a financial perspective. Venus is in Aquarius, and Venus is the planet of money, and Aquarius, from a Capricorn viewpoint, is the sign of money. And so with Venus sextile Mercury, you do kind of have a good understanding of the secrets of money. And other people don't get these secrets, and you get them. And it may be that your own low-profile, fairly secretive activities can help you in a financial sense. I think if you have financial plans, or if you want to do something to enrich yourself, or may not just be about enriching, just getting hold of a sum of money you need, I think that your quiet preparations, not telling anyone what you're doing, can actually be very effective. And perhaps the sooner you get going on it, the better. And so, when you're ready, you'll be able to get what is owed to you. And, we shouldn't forget that, Capricorn is an earth sign. Money does matter. It depends on your exact circumstances how important money is, but I do think that there is a financial dimension today which shouldn't be ignored. Aquarius, you probably don't feel any great inclination to do much, at least to begin with. You may feel that you've got everything sorted out, and that things are as good as they're going to get. So there's no point in being too experimental or for being too adventurous. However, if you stay in one place, you assume you've got everything sorted out, then it's possible that you might be in for some kind of surprise. That is because there is a conjunction between the moon and Uranus in Taurus. And so that moon conjunct Uranus may be about change happening, perhaps at quite a deep level, or happening in a sense that you just weren't expecting it. You perhaps thought that you had put yourself in a position where everything was stable and where everything was predictable, but something happens. And that something happens, I suppose it could be just some external event, or I suppose it could also be a sense of realization, and you see something for the first time, and it really has quite a powerful impact on you. And I should also say, Aquarius, that other people might to an extent be a law unto themselves. Even if you feel that you have distanced yourself from the world and that other people are not a factor, they could become a factor. And it just may be that the people you're in contact with don't behave in the way you expect, and you might respond to that quite negatively. Should you respond to that negatively? I don't think you should. I think that you should, in a way, welcome variety. Aquarians enjoy variety, I suppose, but if it's on their terms. And if it's not on their terms, they can sort of close down the shutters. But that's not something you want to do. I think that you should be ready to embrace the differences in people and their reactions. And if you get a reaction that you weren't expecting, then maybe you should be pleasantly surprised, and you should actually see that as being exciting. Now, as the day progresses, I do think, Aquarius, you become more open-minded, and you find it easier to deal with things that are different, that are sort of outside your normal experience. And that's because the moon is moving into Gemini. The moon is moving into Gemini. And so moon moves into Gemini, well, pretty early, around 9 o'clock in the morning. Is that sort of 9:22 in the morning in California? But that will be tomorrow if you're in Australia or New Zealand. But with the moon moving into Gemini, yeah, you're more open-minded, and I think that you're a little more resilient. You don't feel quite so fragile, and you find it easier to be yourself. And of course, when the moon moves into Gemini, it straight away makes a trine to Pluto, because you've got Pluto in your sign in the first degree of Aquarius, and the moon trine Pluto. So that allows you to really tune into your own power and really get a sense of your own power. And so when you get a sense of your own power, well, what is there to be worried about? Nothing can touch you. You are in control. And once you realize you're in control, I think that you're going to feel a lot more relaxed. And of course, when you're in control, this can be a time when you feel that you don't have to be knocked off balance by external events. So external events might still happen, but I think that's more at the beginning of the day with that moon conjunct Uranus. But yeah, things might happen that you hadn't planned for. But once the moon is in Gemini, I think that you'll find it much easier to deal with them. Indeed, you may be able to take advantage of them. And another aspect we've got is Mercury sextile Venus. So Venus is in Aquarius and Mercury is in Sagittarius. Mercury's making that sextile, and that Mercury sextile Venus is actually very sociable. And so this perhaps relates to the way the day is unfolding. I think at the beginning of the day, you're not feeling very sociable. You don't necessarily appreciate other people's company. But it does change. And when you are with people at the end of the day, but I don't know, perhaps if you go to a party this evening, I think the party should be a great success. I don't see why not, especially in the Americas, in Europe, Africa. Australia, New Zealand, somewhat different, because the moon is if you're in Australia or New Zealand, the moon is going to be in Taurus all day, and so if you want to enjoy moon in Gemini trine Pluto, it may, plus the full impact of that Mercury sextile Venus, you may have to wait until Saturday. So there is a certain time zone impact, but overall, Aquarius, things get better as the day progresses. Things get better, they get more exciting, and you become more sociable. Pisces, the big aspect is probably Jupiter sesquiquadrate Pluto, because Jupiter is your ruler, and this Jupiter sesquiquadrate Pluto, I think, is asking, maybe even demanding, that you make the most of everything you've got. And you shouldn't forget that Jupiter is in Gemini, and Jupiter went into Gemini, I think, in May. Wasn't it the end of May that Jupiter went into Gemini? And it stays in Gemini for a bit of time. I think it goes into Cancer, I think, in May of next year. So you need to make the most of Jupiter being in Gemini, and So what Jupiter in Gemini, in one sense, is about you finding real security and feeling comfortable. That matters to Pisceans at the moment, and it's in general it's an area of growth. I mean, okay, there can be a few Pisceans, I don't know, who are involved in land or real estate. That can be part of it, because Gemini from a Piscean perspective is about land. Real estate can be about fixed assets as well, so that can be about Jupiter and Gemini. But Jupiter sesquiquadrate Pluto is asking that you do whatever you can to give yourself lasting security, not just the security for today or for next week, but making sure that once Jupiter moves out of Gemini into Cancer, that you're still feeling comfortable, that you are grounded. And so perhaps that's what Jupiter sesquiquadrate Pluto is about, and not resting on your laurels, believing that things could always be better, and at the same time not projecting. I mean, there is a danger, Pisces, that you might have this narrative that you cannot find lasting security, you can't find lasting comfort, because there are external forces that are conspiring to undermine you. I mean, that's your narrative. Now, I'm not saying that's not true, but I think you should consider the possibility that you are exaggerating, that you have a high level of responsibility. And I do think Jupiter sesquiquadrate Pluto is about responsibility. And that Pluto does need to be owned and controlled. You don't control Pluto, but Pluto may represent an unconscious force. But just because it's an unconscious force doesn't mean it's destabilizing. At an unconscious level, you are concerned about security issues, and you kind of need to make it conscious and do whatever you can to make sure that both feet are on terra firma. And so don't be satisfied with the way things are. Don't go for just short-term solutions. You should be looking for a long-term solution, making yourself feel comfortable, and asking yourself deep questions about what is the meaning of security. And so that's how Jupiter sesquiquadrate Pluto, I think, is working. And it's just very important not to project it, not to think that there are forces that you can't control but are always going to be undermining you. You've got to take ownership of that all. And I think this issue of security and what does it mean is going to get added poignancy when the moon moves into Gemini. So late in the day, perhaps tomorrow, the moon moves out of Taurus into Gemini, and in fact the moon makes a trine to Pluto. So what we will have moon in Gemini trine Pluto, and Pluto sesquiquadrate Jupiter in Gemini. So with moon and Jupiter both in the sign Gemini, it's like you're being asked to deal with home, security, domestic issues, family issues, both on a long-term level and on a short day-to-day, even hour-to-hour level. So perhaps what's going on over the next day or two, especially in terms of your home and family, is important, and it may be symbolic, and it may be kind of an exemplar of what is happening and what you need to resolve. So I would say be very aware of what's happening over the next, say, 48 hours, and think about what kind of lessons you're being told. And I think that if you pay attention, you will find that ongoing events will give you a clear idea of what you should be doing next and what you do need to do to give yourself lasting security. And now I want to switch to the I Ching. So I asked the question, what is Friday going to be like for those watching the I Ching section of this video? And the first hexagram I got was the Wanderer. And the Wanderer doesn't move. There are no moving lines. And the symbol we have for the Wanderer, if you look at the trigrams, we've got the top three lines represents the sun. It represents fire. The bottom three lines represent the earth. So I suppose you could see that as being fire on the earth. And what the I Ching does talk about fire, but it talks about fast-moving fire, like a grass fire. A grass fire moves quickly. It doesn't stop, always needs fuel. Because if a grass fire stops, it runs out of things to burn and it extinguishes itself. And that is the same with the Wanderer. The Wanderer is someone who is outside their comfort zone, a person who is constantly moving, constantly looking for something. What are you looking for? Well, the I Ching tells us that the Wanderer, like that grass fire is always moving, has to always be moving, and the reason the Wanderer is always moving is because it's looking for security. It's looking for a home. Wanderer doesn't want to be a wanderer anymore, but if security is not available, if a home is not available, you have to keep moving. And this may relate to any activity you're involved with where you don't feel comfortable, where you just feel you don't necessarily know what you're doing. And if you don't know what you're doing, you have to keep moving. You have to keep looking for a home or information or some kind of security or advice or help, and that's what the Wanderer is about. But with the fact that we don't have any moving lines, so in other words, this hexagram doesn't move to another hexagram, and so that might indicate that it's actually quite difficult to find somewhere to move to because there's no transition. And so you may be dealing with something where there aren't any immediate answers, and it might suggest something that is ongoing. You're not going to resolve it today, and you should not be in a hurry to resolve it today. You should just accept the fact that there is a certain amount of ambiguity around, and you just have to keep looking. Now, to give us a further insight into this hexagram, it can be useful to look at the nuclear hexagram. The nuclear hexagram is the hexagram in the middle of the hexagram, and that means knocking off the top and bottom lines. And we look at the top three, but once we've knocked off the top and bottom lines, so we have those four lines in the middle. So the top three lines represent the top trigram, and the bottom three lines represent the bottom trigram. And so the nuclear hexagram, remember, this is not the hexagram itself, it just gives us some broader concept about what is the underlying theme. And the nuclear hexagram is hexagram 28, which is preponderance of the great. And the preponderance of the great represents a huge burden, a burden that it is really very difficult to carry. We can carry it, but it is really hard work, and it's just not going to be easy. I suppose we have to sort of keep moving, but it is tough, and I suppose this tells us something about the Wanderer. The Wanderer is looking for something, but at the same time, the Wanderer is carrying a burden. So what is this burden that we're carrying, which is perhaps underlying our wandering? It may just be a responsibility we've got, and we feel that there's something we have to resolve, and maybe we feel we have to resolve it on our own. Now, if you look at the astrology today, we do have Mercury sextile Venus, and that represents talented people. There are people who are talented today, regardless of your sign. And so perhaps that's one thing you should be looking for. The wanderer is looking for people to help, people who can help, people who have the knowledge and the experience and the wisdom and the good nature to be able to help. And I think with Mercury sextile Venus, those people are available. And also, don't forget that today is a day of a sign change. You know, the moon is moving from Taurus to Cancer, and perhaps that also suggests some kind of transition. I mean, the I Ching doesn't give us a transition. It kind of suggests that we're a little bit stuck here. You know, we're looking for something, we can't find it. But I mean, at some stage our wanderings have to end, but we can't end those wanderings before the time is right. And so do consider what it is that you're unsure about, and don't try and force a solution, but at the same time consider the possibility that help might be available, though you might have to do a bit more wandering if you want to find that help. And now I want to look at the astrology again. Now, I want to consider this shooting on December the 4th. I mean, I've already talked about it. I've looked at the horoscope of the victim, Thompson. I've looked at the chart of someone who has been charged with that crime, Luigi Mangione. Must make it clear, he's only been charged with the crime. We don't know whether or not he committed this crime. And I just kind of want to sort of get this whole thing in perspective, because I think there's been a certain tendency to say that, or to hope almost, that this is a one-off event, that this was done by someone who was disturbed. Perhaps they had a personality disorder. Perhaps they had back pain. Something went wrong. A young person having a crisis. It's not really about society, is it? But I think that is kind of missing the point, isn't it? And we do have this assumption that in his case, or we don't know who did it. The assumption that because he committed this crime, because whoever did it was it was a dramatic thing and a self-destructive thing, supposedly a self-destructive thing, that then there must be something wrong with them. But if you think about it historically, people very often commit this kind of crime. They kill someone who they perceive as being a tyrant or an enemy or someone who is regressive, and they do it and they are stone cold sober. When Brutus killed Caesar, no one is saying that Brutus and the other conspirators, Cassius and so forth, no one is saying that Brutus and Cassius were mad. Brutus and Cassius came from, I believe, a sort of a Stoic tradition, and they had worked out that the only thing they could do, there was logically they had no choice but to kill Caesar. So just because you commit a crime, just because you assassinate Caesar, doesn't mean you're mad. People tried to kill Hitler, for example. Stauffenberg, the bomb plot. No one was saying that Stauffenberg was crazy. I mean, it was a very self-destructive thing to do, to kill Hitler, and him and the conspirators, they committed suicide, were often executed in a horrific way, but they did it as rational players. And then there was a 1939 attempt on Hitler's life by what was his name? Georg Elser. He decided that Hitler needed to be killed, and so he did it. Likewise, the Bader-Meinhof group in Germany, they assassinated people. They assassinated, they kidnapped Hans Martin Schleyer, for example, and they kidnapped him and then they executed him. No one was suggesting, or I suppose they tried to suggest that they tried to suggest perhaps that they had some kind of social problem and sort of Hitler's children and all this kind of stuff. But I think society finds it modern, perhaps particularly modern society, tries to make people sound as if they're crazy because it makes things easier. And maybe you could say that America has a sense of denial. And so if we look at America's chart, for example, here is the United States' chart, and the United States has a Mars-Uranus conjunction in Gemini. I mean, it's a very wide Mars-Uranus conjunction, but that Uranus on the seventh house cusp, to my mind, is about projection and not being able to recognize things, not being able to recognize things about itself. Uranus on the descendant. America is famous for its obsession with the war on terror. For example, after 9/11, seeing terrorism all over the world, seeing all these terrorist threats, but not being aware or not being conscious of the fact that it itself is a terrorist country in some respects. Now, you could say, for example, there's a strong view that the Americans blew up the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. I know they tried to blame some Ukrainian team or whatever for doing it, but it's very likely that American operatives acted in a terrorist way. Or, for example, the overthrow of the Allende regime in 1973 in Chile, that America supported, and they unleashed terror on the population on not the whole population of Chile, but a lot of people were executed and thrown out of helicopters and so forth. This is America, but perhaps it goes kind of deeper than that. And if you look at the whole roots of America, America started with a revolution. I mean, nothing wrong with having a revolution, but it perhaps ignores its perhaps revolutionary origins and the concept of having to act to overthrow a king. Now, as I understand it, the American Revolution was not really full of terrorist activities. I mean, I know that royalist tax collectors were tarred and feathered, but some of them were scarred by this, but I don't think any of them were actually killed. But at the same time, there is this obsession with tyranny and overthrowing tyranny, and that Uranus on a descendant, and that kind of persists. And this is one of the people, one of those people that argue for the Second Amendment. One reason Americans need to have guns is because what if there's a tyrannical society, and what if that were to happen? And of course, the reason the Second Amendment has its antecedents in 17th century Britain, 17th century England, where James II was trying to restrict people's access to guns, and Parliament opposed that. The British gentleman needed to be able to defend himself, not just against assailants, but against tyranny. But then there's a question of what is tyranny, and so people have these guns. And so why do people have these guns? Because it's, to defend themselves against perceived tyranny. And who are the tyrants? Okay, it might just be governments out of control, but maybe it's reaching a stage where it's companies, organizations could be perceived as being tyrannical. So in a sense, with the Second Amendment, or with people supporting a Second Amendment, they're supporting people to be able to make that decision about what tyranny is, and to actually feel that they need to do something about it, and not necessarily because they're insane. And maybe in terms of the killing of the CEO of United Healthcare, perhaps this is what we're seeing. And, someone perceived it as an act of tyrannicide. And the reason people are so desperate to regard it as being the act of a madman or someone who's got psychologically disturbed is because they can't deal with the consequence. And part of the consequences of that is, I think that does come from the fact that Pluto has gone into Aquarius. Pluto is in the same sign as it was during the American Revolution, also at the same time as during the French Revolution. And with Pluto in Aquarius, people are concerned about power and the demonstration of power, who has the power, and that assassination, as far as that killing on December the 4th, I perceive that as, I felt a huge change happen somehow. And I think it's a change that's going to unfold over the next 10, 20 years. And I'll sort of be explaining this in a moment. And so, it's almost like before that assassination, you look at sort of Fox News, for example, they're all excited about the insurgency of Trump. Trump was the outsider. Trump was a radical. He was the one who was going to overthrow the system. And, a lot of people obviously supported Trump. People supported Trump from all sorts of different political viewpoints. There was even a group of people called the MAGA communists. I don't know whether you came across them. They were essentially communists who supported Trump because they kind of wanted to overthrow things, and Trump represented the rebel. I don't quite know about the full ideology of MAGA communists, but there certainly was that strand in thinking on social media. And so Trump was the insurgency. I'm sure that many of the people who voted for Trump, supported Trump, are also have zero sympathy for the CEO of United Healthcare. Maybe they're the sort of people that are trying to contribute to the defence, to try to offer to just pay for Luigi Mangione's defence and pay for his legal fees. Of course, we don't know that Luigi Mangione is someone who's just been charged of it. We don't really know whether he committed the crime or not. So something has suddenly changed, and then when you see sort of Fox News sort of being very sort of talking about this and how horrific it is that the CEO has been assassinated, well, they've kind of in a small way, they've been hoisted by their own petard. I don't know what you think, but the genie is out of the bottle, and in a way, the same forces that got Trump re-elected are the same forces that many people in America are, to be honest, very supportive of the assassination of the CEO of United Healthcare. That's a tough thing to say, but just looking around, some people are kind of couching it in polite language, saying, well, I would never condone murder, but what are actually people saying in private? So something has really shifted here, and a lot of people are finding it difficult to actually get to grips with it. And I would see Pluto as being involved, but I would also want to take things back, and I would actually want to take things back to the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction in 2020. So here is the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction in 2020, December the 20th, 21st, when Jupiter was conjunct Saturn at 0 degrees Aquarius, 0 degrees 29 Aquarius. Now, I have set that chart for New York, which was where the CEO was assassinated, or murdered, however you want to see it. And the ascendant was 6 degrees 2 Taurus. We had Uranus at 6 degrees 56 Taurus. So we had Uranus exactly rising. if you're interested, Black Moon Lilith, true Black Moon Lilith, is pretty close to being rising. And so that is a dramatic chart, I would have said. The question is, how does it manifest? And I think it's possible that whenever that chart gets transited, we start to get a feel for what that Jupiter-Saturn conjunction is really about. And so what about comparing this chart, the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction, with the chart of Brian Thompson, the United Healthcare CEO, being shot? And so if we're going to put the conjunction in the middle, and we're going to put the Brian Thompson shooting on the outer wheel. So here is the chart. Again, I've set the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction for New York. Now, Mars went stationary about a week ago, around the time of the killing. Mars went stationary on, I think it was December the 6th, so 2 days after the killing. Mars went stationary direct, so Mars was pretty much stationary at the time of the killing. It was at 6 degrees 8 Leo. Now, the ascendant was 6 degrees 2 Leo. So, in other words, Mars was exactly square the ascendant in 2020, the ascendant of the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction. And it was also fairly exact, the square of that Uranus. So that Uranus rising for that Jupiter-Saturn conjunction in 2020 was being aspected by Mars. It was very much being activated. Additionally, a look at the moon. The midheaven was 20 degrees 7 Capricorn when that Jupiter-Saturn conjunction was exact. And the moon at the time of Brian Thompson's killing was at 2052. So the moon was on the midheaven. So I would have said this provides us evidence that the whole thing was activated. That chart for Jupiter-Saturn for the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction was activated by the killing. And the ascendant, if assuming he was killed at 7 degrees 44, I think it was 6:44 in the morning, the ascendant was at 7:39 Sagittarius. So the ascendant was right on Venus. And of course, Pluto. Look at Pluto. Pluto was at 0 degrees 18 Aquarius. So that Jupiter-Saturn conjunction, whatever it means, and it's going to mean lots of different things across the world, it's now become real with Pluto moving into Aquarius. It has now well and truly been activated. So that's one way in which I'm seeing this. And so what I'm kind of suggesting is that what this killing of Brian Thompson, and it's not about who killed him. We don't know who killed him. I know someone has been charged with the crime, but it's now brought into reality the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction. And that Jupiter-Saturn conjunction, going back to the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction itself, set for the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction set for New York. Notice also that that Mars is square Pluto, and so Mars square Pluto is that's interesting. Mars square Pluto. It's about violence. It's violence not just in America but around the world. Extreme violence. That's a manifestation of it. And the moon is in Pisces. The moon is at 27 Pisces. So I thought it would be interesting to compare the chart of the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction with the horoscope of Brian Thompson. So when we do this comparison, we perhaps are seeing him as a representative of the system, but he was in a way you could say he was the first victim of a change that has happened. So let's compare Brian. So here's so Brian Thompson's chart is I'll put him in the inner wheel. So Brian Thompson's chart is in the middle, and that's hold on, let me go back to Brian Thompson's chart. There's Brian Thompson's chart. I don't have a time of birth for Brian Thompson, and I just want to see what the transits were for him at the time of there you go. Sorry about that. So there were some important transits going on. These are not his transits at the time he was killed. These are the transits on for him at the time of the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction. How the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction occurred to him, and he has his Uranus. Brian Thompson had his Uranus at 2341 Libra. So when you see that Uranus, try not to personalize it. We should be looking at the CEO of United Healthcare, not Brian Thompson. We're seeing him as a representative of a company, representative of perhaps of capitalism and everything that is making that many Americans are perceiving as making their life difficult, as perhaps being exploited. So see that Uranus as being something generational. Someone, Uranus was in Libra in 1974, something generational about him. And Mars was with that Jupiter-Saturn opposition, was opposition his Uranus. And Pluto was square his Uranus. And so his Uranus is really highly configured. I mean, Uranus, for him, Uranus in Libra, was perhaps about his generation, people born in the early 70s, mid-70s, trying to be different, trying to stand out. In his case, he's trying to stand out as head of an insurance company, but it's also that generation's vulnerabilities because it's their Uranus. Uranus is about things happening to them. And so that Uranus is being hit by Mars and is being hit by Pluto. And so he's the one. He's the guy that gets it. But it could have been someone else. It's not about him as an individual we're talking about him as a representative, as him maybe, I mean, a bad thing to say, it's the first shot, and I believe that this is the start of something, and this is how we have to see the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction unfolding. And it's interesting also that the moon at the time of the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction in 2020 was at 27 Pisces. And Brian Thompson had his moon. Well, okay, if he was born very late in the day, his moon could have been in Aries, but his moon was was late Pisces. The moon was in late Pisces at the time of the conjunction. So his moon kind of links up with it all. So in a way, he's the representative of it all. And another thing is his Neptune. Now this Venus was at 7 degrees 36 Sagittarius at the time of this conjunction. He had his Neptune at 714 Sagittarius. So his Neptune was hitting the Venus of this conjunction, and in fact, this Jupiter-Saturn conjunction was also hitting the Pluto of Luigi Mangione. Now, I must make it clear, we don't know for sure. We don't know whether Luigi Mangione was responsible. Just because he's been charged doesn't mean that he's guilty. But there is the Jupiter-Saturn conjunctions Venus, and it was right on his Pluto, and so I think that perhaps is interesting, because you've got this lineup. So you've got Brian Thompson's Neptune at 7 Sagittarius, you've got Luigi Manchione's Pluto at 7 Sagittarius, and we have Venus at the time of the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction at 7 Sagittarius. Now, one thing I haven't mentioned about Luigi Mangione, which I should have mentioned in terms of his chart, so there's Luigi Manchione's chart. There's his Pluto at 7 degrees Sagittarius, and it's interesting that Pluto is square the nodes. And I forgot to mention this, that Luigi Mangione has Pluto square the nodes, and Ebertin says about Pluto squaring the nodes, it's something like the tragic destiny of a large group of people. Let me look at the combination of stellar influences to just remind myself of what Reinhold Ebertin said about Pluto on that. He says Pluto, a dragon's head. Pluto is the pairing is the common. He says the principle is the common destiny of a large mass of people, and he says one of the probable manifestations, in a negative sense, is a common and tragic destiny shared with other people. And he has that Pluto on the nodes, and of course his Pluto is on Brian Thompson's Neptune, and of course it's also on the Jupiter-Saturn's Venus. So there really is a sort of a link up there. So what I'm kind of suggesting is that this is a sort of a beginning, and if we think about Pluto in Aquarius is about control. It's about individuals wanting to be in control and wanting agency. Pluto in Aquarius is also about governments wanting to be in control. The United States government that came into being while Pluto was in Aquarius wanted to be in control. Wanted to be in control, for example, of taxation. Very much at the beginning of George Washington's presidency, I think, during George Washington's presidency, you had the Whiskey Rebellion. People were concerned about whiskey tax, and it got stomped on. Likewise, French Revolution. One form of government was moved into another form of government, and the French revolutionary government was very Aquarian in the sense of trying to change. It was very much year zero, changing the name of the months, the counting system, trying to decimalizing the week. That is very Pluto in Aquarius. Of course, Napoleon sort of rolled back on that a bit afterwards, I think. So at the opposite end, Pluto in Aquarius is people not being comfortable with that, people being rebellious, so people wanting to assert their freedom. And so I think it's not, I do think it's not just about Jupiter and Aquarius. I do think it's about the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction and how the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction unfolds. So as far as I'm concerned, I'm not suggesting that this killing of Brian Thompson is immediately going to cause a sort of a blast of domestic terrorism. But we're not going to see that straight away. I don't think. I think that it may take a fair amount of time to manifest, but in a way, I believe the first shot has been fired. But of course, the United States is terrified of this, I believe, at an unconscious level. I think that the American collective understands the danger. It can project its views on terrorism onto the outside world, but I think that is why it's so important for the powers that be dismiss whoever the killer was as someone who is mentally ill. It cannot be seen as something collective, as something that is something that is part of the collective, and that perhaps the kind of person that perpetrates this kind of crime, it may actually be stone cold sober. Now, the way I see this unfolding is being in terms of economics. I mean, economics is what it all comes down to in the end, doesn't it? I mean, I was looking at someone talking about this and saying, well, if you don't like the healthcare system, why don't you? I think it was Anthony Pompliano. If you don't, Anthony Pompliano. He's a great sort of advocate of cryptocurrency, and I think it was an interview of Anthony Pompliano, and he was talking about this, and he was saying, well, if you don't like the healthcare system, this is capitalism. It's wonderful. We've got freedom. So if you don't like the healthcare system, and you don't like what United Healthcare is doing, well, it's easy. What you do is you set up your own healthcare company, and that sorts out the problem. Isn't capitalism wonderful? I mean, of course, that doesn't make much sense. I mean, basic Marxist theory says that you can't just do that. But as capitalism develops, you get larger and larger companies start to squeeze out the small companies. And this is what happens. You cannot get new companies taking over, except during times of technological change. That's the only time you can have it. Okay, that's why we had these new companies coming from nowhere during the internet and sort of dot-com boom. But that window is over. And so that is, I would have said, a rather naive view that somehow whoever killed Brian Thompson, rather than killing Brian Thompson, should have set up their own healthcare company. That would have been the way to do it. A company that was fair. I mean, certainly from a Marxist perspective, that doesn't make any sense at all. That is impossible, pretty much impossible. And I think that is a rather naive view of capitalism. So the reality is that as capitalism develops, as it perhaps moves into its crisis, because it's going to become more and more difficult, and people are going to have more and more resentment. And so this is maybe what happens as we finally move into economic crisis. And I think this is what is going to happen. So going back to the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction and my feelings on the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction. So that's for London, so let's going back to this. The Jupiter-Saturn cycle very much connected with, I think, the business cycle. And you remember there was a Jupiter-Saturn conjunction in the year 2000, I think. And around that time, we had the dot-com crash. But very often, the first part of the Jupiter-Saturn conjunct cycle is actually quite favourable, is quite positive. Once you get over the first hiccups, which we got, say, between 2000 and 2003, there was a real boom until 2008. And likewise with this, I'm beginning to think, certainly in terms of America, that particularly with the Trump presidency, Trump's term, that things are going to possibly boom economically, and it may seem that things are going to be okay, and perhaps worries about domestic terrorism may fade into the background, but domestic terrorism only really comes to be a real feature when the economy starts to break down. And of course the economy is likely to break down finally. I think we may have another 4 years, but where I see the real crisis happening is with the Jupiter-Saturn opposition in 2029. So what I'm saying is, I'm sorry if I've repeated myself. If you've looked at the video I did sort of before on this subject, but in 5 years' time, Jupiter is opposition Saturn, and this is when things really fall apart. I think this is probably likely to be towards the beginning of Vance's term. I mean, assuming, let's say Vance takes over from Donald. I'm pretty sure. I mean, I haven't done the astrology on this, but my assumption is the Republicans are going to win the 2028 election. And say, for example, if Vance is president, it will go into crisis around the time of a Jupiter-Saturn opposition. And this Jupiter-Saturn opposition there's a Mars-Pluto conjunction. Remember, there was a Mars-Pluto square at the time of the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction, but now we've got a Mars-Pluto conjunction at the time of the opposition. And so this is when we might see that kind of domestic terror that maybe the killing of Brian Thompson was the start. And, it's not necessarily committed by people who are crazy. It may be committed by people who are desperate, or by people who've worked it through. They feel they have to do it, that they need to do it to prove a point, that they have some kind of moral obligation to do so. It might be a twisted obligation, but they may nonetheless feel a moral obligation, in the same way that Brutus felt a moral obligation to kill Caesar, and Brutus and Cassius and so forth. So that might be something that is going to develop in 5 years' time, because everything has been thrown at the system to keep it working. The capitalist system, the business cycle. People won't worry about the business cycle anymore. We just have constant growth. The markets are always going up, but it's like at some stage one's pushed it as far as it can, and I think that moment is going to be right at the end of the decade. And I think that all sort of links into Pluto in Aquarius. And going back to Pluto in Aquarius is about government control. And at the moment, Trump's won. People are thinking about it's a time for small government and all of this kind of thing. But I think the 2032 election and the run-up to that 2032 election, things are going to be very different. Those same voters who at the moment are disgusted with insurance companies, a lot of people in America, they may not say so openly, but I think they seem to be very sympathetic to whoever killed Brian Thompson, and they seem to have very little sympathy for Brian Thompson himself. Those voters, when you have real economic hardship, which I think is going to be happening in 5 or 6 years' time, they're certainly going to be, I think, sympathetic towards certain acts of violence, and they're also going to be looking for a government that is going to sort things out. So if you think that big government is over, that Trump represents the end of big government, think again. Maybe, I think the Republicans will win the 2028 election, although I haven't looked at it astrologically, but the 2032 election, I'm thinking that whoever wins the 2032 election is going to be won by a government who want massive government intervention. And that's going to be Pluto in Aquarius. That's when Pluto in Aquarius is really going to come into its own, because capitalism, I think, will be in real crisis by 2030. And the same people who want less government now are going to be wanting as much government as possible. At least that's my view, and I'm speculating at the moment. But I thought I wanted to say a little bit more about the assassination or the killing of Brian Thompson, and I did have some further thoughts on the matter. But I think that a lot of people in America are in denial about it, and I think part of that denial is this desperation to think that it was some individual act, that it was just a person who had their own psychological issues. And we don't know who it is. I must make it clear that, Luigi Mangione has been charged with this crime, but we don't know whether he did it. He may not have done it. I think he's pleading not guilty. At least that's the moment. I think he's. I think he's denied the charge. I think. Anyway, correct me if I'm wrong. Anyway, that's all I'm going to say for today. Sorry to do another ramble, but I just wanted to get something off my mind. I think I had to say something there. Okay, so thank you very much for listening. And if you enjoyed this video, I'd be very grateful if you were to like it. If you're not subscribed, I'd be super grateful if you were to subscribe. And if you want to buy me a coffee, there is a link in the description. So yeah, thanks again for watching, and I will talk to you again tomorrow.